So the trickiest part about selection statements is remembering the rules, essentially, about how you can use them. So I hope you're excited about selection statements. This is the beginning of artificial intelligence, getting the computer to make decisions. It sort of all starts with selection statements. I mean, that's oversimplification, but still, you'll get to do some sort of basic, very, very basic AI-ish type stuff with selection statements. And in Python, selection starts with the if statement. And we have elif and we have else, but you always have to have an if. So this is a legitimate statement, right? So if some sort of true false condition, colon, and then some code. You don't have to have an if or an elif, but you can't have an elif alone. You must have an if, and then you can have, sorry, that's not right. Dum-de-dum. Erase this. Get my pen back. You can have an elif. So here we've got some sort of code. We have elif, true, false, condition, and we can have some sort of other statement. We don't have to have an else statement, and you can have as many elifs as you want. So we could have more elifs. This is all legitimate. One elif would be fine. As many elifs as you want would be fine. These are all legal. All right? We can have an if, some sort of true, false condition, some code, and then an else. Right? If this is false, then this else will definitely run. That's completely legal. And we can have else if some sort of true, false condition, some code, elif, true, false condition, some sort of code, and else. All of these are legal, but you can never have an elif by itself. You can never have an else by itself. You always have to have an if, and when you have an if and you have elif else, they have to be lined up together at the left. And any code that belongs to the if statement has to be indented so that the interpreter, the Python interpreter, knows that these statements belong to this if statement. We have this else, the code that belongs to that else has to be indented. The same with the elif. So we always start with an if, and you could have as many ifs as you want with no elifs and no elses if that logic makes particular sense in your program. But every elif and else has to be paired with an initial if statement. The elifs have to come before the else. You can't have the elif after the else. So this is all a block together. These are all related. So in this one by itself, if the condition is true, the code will run. If the condition is false, the code won't run. It will just go to the next statement. In this block right here, if the true false condition is true, the code will run and it will skip the elif and the rest of the elifs. Only one of these that are all matched together will run. If this statement is true, none of these elifs will run. If this statement is false, it's going to check the next elif. If that one is true, this code will run and it will skip the rest of the elifs. If this is false, the code will be skipped and the next elif will be checked. But only one of these will run, and potentially none of them will run. If they're all false, none of this code will run. Now over here, if this if statement is true, the else won't run. But if the if statement is false, the else will absolutely positively run. No condition is checked with the else. So sometimes you'll hear this called the cleanup condition. If none of the ifs and elifs are true, the else will always run. Same with here. If this if is true, nothing else runs, nothing else gets checked. If this if is false, then the next elif gets checked. If it's true, everything else gets skipped. If it's false, if all the if and elifs are false, then that else will run. So it's important for you to experiment and understand these rules. This is the trickiest thing about selection statements, is understanding how to structure them, especially when you get to being able to nest. I mean, within this code here in this if statement could be another nested if, elif, else statement, or just another if statement. So it requires a lot of practice to really get the hang of how the rules work for ifs, elifs, and else statements. So let's write some code with some if statements, and we want to have good practice now, so we're going to make sure that all of our code is within a function. So in this case, we're just going to practice putting everything inside of a main function, and then we'll go ahead and call it at the end. But we just want to kind of practice to see how if statements, elif and else works. All right. So if I have something like, let's go ahead and let's get a value from the user. So float input, enter a number, right? All right. Now let's have something like if, we'll do if x is greater than 0. So in this case, if x is a positive number, we're going to print x is a positive number. All right. Now let's have else. If it's not a positive number, we're going to say that it is x is a negative number. All right. Then just having this called main down here is going to go ahead and run our function, and let's see what happens. All right, so we're going to enter a number. So I'm going to enter the number 50, and 50 is a positive number. All right, let's run it again. Enter a number, -10. -10 is a negative number. So far, so good. Let's run it again. 0. This counts 0 as a negative number. This is very important. So we go back here and take a look at our conditions, and we see that x0 is not included as a positive number. If we want to include it as a positive number, we can put this equal signs here so that if x is equal, greater than, or equal to 0, it's going to print that it's a positive number. So when we run it this time and we check 0, 0 is going to be a positive number. So let's say we don't want 0 to be positive. We want to label 0 as 0. We'll keep this as greater than 0, and let's add an elif. We're going to say elif x is less than 0. This is going to be our negative. Else print x is 0. Right? Now when we run this, if we enter 0, we're going to get that 0 is 0. It's not going to be counted as positive. It's not going to be counted as 0. And we can watch the flow here. We took our x, whatever our x value is, and first we check if it's greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, it's going to print this, and none of this code is ever going to be checked. If we entered a -10, this will be false. This code is skipped, and we're going to check is x less than 0. For a -10, it would be. Actually, I have an error there. Print x is a negative number. If we had entered 0, this would also be false, and so it would jump down here, and then we really don't care. It's not going to check anything. No matter what it is, it's going to print x as 0, but we're fine, because with all numbers, if it's not a positive number and it's not a negative number, it's going to be 0, because positive is defined as any number greater than 0, and negative is defined as any number that is less than 0. So we have to be very careful about our logic, because it works out very well in this example, but there are times where we can get logic errors with our cleanup condition if we haven't accounted for all the possible values that we could be getting into our code. So this is just one pretty simple example here. So we have an if, an elif, and an else in this case, and this makes logical sense. What if we had the case where, let's check some different things about numbers. So let's check if a number is even. So if x mod 2 equals 0, that tells us if x is an even number. And actually, I'm going to put this back. Let's keep what we had. Let's fix that, and let's add another elif in here. I think this is going to show the point a little bit better. So, all right, I'm going to add this in here. Whoops, compare it to 0. Gotta close this up. Then I'm going to print that x is even, right? And then I'm going to put this statement in here, elif x mod 2 does not equal 0, then it's not an even number. So we're going to print that x is odd. All right, so now we're going to go through and let's check out our numbers. Here we go. Okay, make this a little bit smaller. It's going to ask us to enter a number, and I'm going to enter the number 50. And I get that 50 is a positive number. But wait a minute, 50 is an even number, and I wanted it to print even. Well, the problem is that because this is true, this is an if statement, and this is elif, it's never going to check this. The if statement was true, so all of this was skipped. So it's never even going to take a look at this. And so it's just going to print that and never even check that. Interestingly enough, we have an even worse problem with this code. We're going to run, let's say I enter the number 33, which is clearly an odd number. It's going to say that it's a positive number, it's an odd number. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. All right, let's try it. We're going to enter negative 33. All right, so this is an odd number. It tells us it's an odd number, but it never even tells us that it's a negative number for the exact same reason. First of all, we checked negative 33. Was it greater than 0? No. Was it even? No. Was it odd? No. Or yes. So it printed that it was odd, and it never made it to these. So in this case, if I want to be able to also check if it's even or odd, I have to take these out and I have to make them their kind of own little set here. I'm going to say if and then elif, and I could have just made that else. The number is either even or odd, but in this case I should be able to get more than one statement. So if I have 50, I'm going to get that it's a positive number and that it's even. So I was able to fix that by giving it an opening point. So here this if statement will be checked, and then if it's even, we're going to get the printout of if it's even, and if it's not, we're going to get the printout of if it's odd. So again, we have to be really careful not only about the value of our conditionals, but our logic, the way that our data flows through our selection statements. So this is just a pretty quick beginning, just to kind of touch on selection statements. So you're going to get some practice with conditionals and with selection statements. And if you run into any problems, just let me know, and I can make some more videos on some specific some specific examples that you might run into problems with, and you definitely will because it's programming. So, all right, happy programming, and let me know when you get stuck.